This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Monday, July 8th. This is Africa 54. Africa launches a continental free trade agreement. Could this mean a new era of peace and prosperity? The International Criminal Court finds a former Congolese rebel leader guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And we'll take you to Egypt to get the latest on the quarterfinals of the Africa Cup of Nations. Former Congolese rebel leader Bosco Ntaganda was convicted Monday on all 18 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Ntaganda had denied being a killer and a war criminal when he spoke at his trial last week. His comments are in sharp contrast to the image painted by ICC prosecutors who say Ntaganda commanded a rebel group called the Union of Congolese Patriots that killed, raped and exploited people in Congo's eastern Ituri province in 2002 and 2003. Presiding Judge Robert Fremer on Monday informed Ntaganda he had been found guilty of all 18 counts and listed his many crimes.
The Chamber, having heard all of the evidence presented by the parties, finds you guilty of murder as crime against humanity, guilty of murder as a war crime, guilty of intentionally directing attacks against civilians as a war crime, guilty of rape as a crime against humanity, guilty of rape as a war crime, guilty of sexual slavery as a crime against humanity, guilty of sexual slavery as a war crime, guilty of conscripting and enlisting children under the age of 15 years into an armed group and using them to participate actively in hostilities.
The attacks by the UPC allegedly targeted specific ethnic groups such as the Lendu, Bira and Nande. One alleged co-conspirator was Thomas Lubanga, who was sentenced to 14 years in prison in 2012 after the ICC convicted him of conscripting child soldiers. Ntaganda faces a maximum life sentence. A separate hearing will be scheduled to determine his sentence. At least 7 people were killed and 22 others were wounded in Mogadishu Monday in 2 separate attacks, according to witnesses. The first attack took place near a civilian hospital when Mogadishu police stopped a vehicle loaded with explosives. The driver refused to exit the vehicle, forcing police to open fire. Moments later, the vehicle exploded, killing 2 people while wounding 18 others. Separately, a suspected militant vehicle attempted to pass through a security checkpoint on a crowded road in Mogadishu. Security forces responded by killing 2 militants. Witnesses say a police officer and 2 civilians were also killed. 4 others were wounded in this attack. In 1981, Mauritania became the last country in the world to abolish slavery. But the problem remains prevalent and the government appears to be doing little to combat it. Even though independent organizations are helping free slaves across the country, victims are still facing hurdles in their new lives. VOA's Isha Sarai reports from Nouakchott.
Barka Mint Yarba doesn't know how old she is. Born into slavery, she spent the long days of her childhood tending to her master's animals.
I
was never at school, but I watched my master's children go to school and learn the Quran. Since I was young, I watched the herd from morning until night. They beat me when I did not do something they asked. Like once, I did not light the stove because I was scared of fire.
Her mother and the rest of her family lived in slavery too. Yarba is one of an unknown number of Mauritanians who have been freed from slavery. The government denies that slavery remains a problem, making it difficult to assess the number of those affected. but local organizations are working to help freed slaves. The group SOS Esclave helped the Yarba family settle into a new home in Mauritania's capital, Nouakchott.
I cook and clean for a family here. They are nice. I learned how to cook when I moved here. The work isn't too tiring.
But Yarba, like the rest of her family, still lacks papers to pursue other work or an education. For 8 years, she's been trying to get the government to provide her with proper documentation or financial compensation.
I'm still waiting for justice and reparations for all of the damage and loss we suffered at the hands of slave owners who left us without education and without documentation.
Still, Yarba is hopeful for her future, confident that her life and the state of slavery in the country can only improve. Isha Sarai, VOA News, Nouakchott.
Monday marks the official launch of Africa's Continental Free Trade Agreement. The economic deal could trigger a new era of peace and prosperity. Nigeria, with Africa's biggest economy, and Benin signed onto the new African Continental Free Trade Area Sunday at an African Union summit in Niger, leaving Eritrea as the only African Union nation still to join the pact. If successful, experts predict a $3.4 trillion free trade bloc leading to jobs and development. It took 17 years of bitter and tough negotiations to reach Sunday's milestone, which experts say could boost trade among African nations by 60% in just 3 years. But the continent faces many challenges, including, in many areas, unreliable or non-existent roads and rail lines, unrest, corruption, and deeply entrenched bureaucracies. Now, when economies and reduce such trade barriers as tariffs, the pact aims to increase employment prospects, living standards, and opportunities in Africa, and to make Africans more competitive regionally and globally. Now, when Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa took office in 2017, he signed deals promising billions of dollars in foreign investment to help revive the nation's moribund economy, but the funds never materialized. Government officials are now acknowledging the country still has major steps to take before investors are willing to sink cash into new projects. Columbus Mavunga reports from Bulawayo.
At its peak, this state-owned cold storage company was the biggest African beef exporter to European Union countries. The company no longer stores or produces anything, and its freezers sit empty. A British investor has expressed interest in taking over the company, but details are sketchy. Zelipa Moyo, a 45-year-old mother of 2, is hoping the company will reopen soon.
If CFC reopens, I will go and look for the job of cleaning because selling wares does not make enough profit to survive. There is no profit because prices of wares keep going up and I am not able to restock as I want to.
The situation is so bleak. The Bulawayo-based National Youth Development Trust says it has stopped telling young people to expect foreign investors to start businesses in this part of the country.
For us, it's a matter of trying to get young people to be creative, because, you see, investors also want to see what locals are doing to invest in their own economy. It's expensive for young people to get into businesses, later on for foreigners to get into business.
Stevenson Okutle Dlamini is an economist and a senior lecturer at the National University of Science and Technology of Zimbabwe. He says other things that give investors cold feet about Zimbabwe are the unstable economy, corruption, and unfriendly investor laws, including one that says any business in the country must be majority owned by Zimbabwean blacks. He says that has to change.
Prior experiences, we have seen a lot of policy inconsistencies, and investors still have that memory. And now, for us to convince them that now our policies are consistent, they need to observe them over a specified period of time.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa has set up an advisory committee to address investor concerns, among other issues. Busisa Moyo is an industrialist and a member of the advisory committee. He says it will take time to build up investors' confidence after President Robert Mugabe's autocratic regime.
We are seeing tourist traffic. We have investors who are calling us now. Yes, they are not making the commitments now, but they're starting to inquire. Whereas before, nobody was calling, nobody was asking, nobody was looking at opportunities. And we're talking very large institutions.
He says Zimbabweans now want to see action in the form of job growth and price stability. For most Zimbabweans who have suffered through 20 years of a chronically bad economy, that kind of change can't come soon enough. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Bulawayo, Zimbabwe.
Moving to a new country to explore new opportunities can be an exciting change. For refugees, however, fleeing their home and leaving behind loved ones to establish a new life in an unfamiliar land is difficult. In the southern U.S. state of Georgia, a coffee shop in Clarkston is making a heartfelt effort to transition refugees into their new lives in America. VOA's Imran Jadoon has more.
Clarkston, Georgia is home to residents from over 40 different nationalities and some 60 different languages. The small 2.7 square kilometer area is often referred to as the most diverse small city in America.
Maybe we'll have the same list here and on the truck because they get a free cup of coffee.
Kitty Murray owns a coffee shop here, but this is not an ordinary coffee shop. It serves a purpose in the community besides providing coffee. It only employs refugees. Murray says she wants to break the negative stereotypes associated with refugees.
And I feel like the way the world looks at refugees is more negative and as if they're a drain or as if they're dangerous. And I knew that wasn't true.
The Refuge Coffee Shop provides a one-year mentorship program where employees take part in English classes as well as mentorship programs.
Hey, your coffee is going to be $1.75, sir. Can you have small iced water?
Sumaya Maksudi is one of the baristas here. She says she has grown as a person and found a home away from home.
I learned about myself. I learned how to dream. I learned how to grow. I learned how I can plan my future. Otherwise, I would be just so lost in my life here, in America.
Like Sumaya, Malik Alarmash also worked for Refuge Coffee as a barista. After 1 year, he was placed in a program that eventually led him to owning a successful food catering business. He says none of that would have been possible without Refuge Coffee and Kitty Murray.
I first practiced my English language and I get to know the community, and I was included in a job training program where I developed my business skills, and I got introduced to people who works in the same area as I wanted to be at the same time. So my experience with Refuge Coffee went very, very well. After that, we became a family and friends.
Kitty says she wants to build bridges between the refugees and the local community of Clarkston, a growing community as more refugees are being resettled here.
We decided we wanted to go deep rather than wide, and we wanted to invest in people. And what's great about that is we are able to do what we do with the refugee community, not just for it. So we kind of all joined in the mission together.
And by looking at the lives of some of these refugees and their success stories, it seems Kitty is accomplishing her mission. Imran Jadoon, VOA News, Clarkston, Georgia.
A South African man who had won the opportunity to become the first black African to go into space has died in a motorcycle crash. Mandla Maseko, 30, was killed in Pretoria over the weekend, according to a family statement reported by local media on Monday. Maseko became known as Afronaut and was an inspiration to many South Africans when he won an international competition to get a place in the AXA Apollo Space Academy and spent a week in training at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida in 2015. His goal was to go into suborbital flight in which he would experience weightlessness. We'll be right back.
I am Sheikh Asali, host and senior editor for VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African Beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
At the beginning of the 2019 year, voters from 10 African nations were scheduled to vote in general elections. So far, only Nigeria, Senegal, Comoros, South Africa, and Malawi have held elections. But there has been no transfer of power. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho has more.
Tens of millions of Africans have gone to the polls in an effort to use the ballot box to deepen the quality of democratic governance and bring about political transitions. However, only the Democratic Republic of the Congo has had a peaceful transfer of power. On January 24th, Felix Tshisekedi was sworn in as DRC's president, making the country's first ever peaceful handover of power after multiple bitterly disputed elections since the country gained independence from Belgium in 1960.
I do solemnly swear before God and the nation to observe and to defend the Constitution and the laws of the Republic.
Perhaps the symbolism of one leader handing over the presidency to another, as President Joseph Kabila wrapped the presidential sash around his successor, was in sharp contrast to what we have often seen on the continent. In Sudan, Omar al-Bashir was ousted as president by the military in April. He ruled Sudan with an iron fist for 30 years before he was overthrown following mass protests that have rocked the country since December 2018. The military announced that it would set up a transition military council to run the country for up to 2 years, but pro-democracy demonstrators are firmly rejecting that plan. Earlier this month, Sudanese ex-president Omar al-Bashir appeared before a prosecutor in Khartoum, where he was charged with corruption-related offenses. In Senegal, President Macky Sall easily won re-election. Senegal has long been viewed as the region's most stable democracy. It's worth mentioning that two of the best-known opposition figures were banned from running in the February election due to corruption convictions that rights groups say were politically motivated. Also in West Africa, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari took the oath of office in May for a second four-year term, to the cheers of many Nigerians who looked forward to a brighter future at the Eagle Square in the heart of Abuja.
With leadership and sense of purpose, we can lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years.
Buhari, 76, won with 15.2 million votes. The opposition claims that voter rigging and corruption murdered this election. In 2015, Buhari was Nigeria's first democratically elected opposition candidate to be handed power from incumbent President Goodluck Jonathan in the nation's history. South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn in as president, vowing to create jobs and tackle deep-rooted corruption.
I'm also aware of the challenges our country faces, but I'm also alive to the fact that our people are filled with hope for a better tomorrow.
Ramaphosa becomes the country's fourth democratically elected president since the end of the apartheid era in 1994. Malawian President Peter Mutharika was sworn in last month for a second term after a contentious election marred by allegations of fraud and vote rigging. Malawi's opposition rejected the results and are calling for countrywide demonstrations over the disputed results. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
The U.S. Department of Homeland Security chief is disputing reports of inadequate food, water, and sanitation in crowded detention centers along the U.S.-Mexico border. At the same time, some members of Congress are calling for improved treatment of migrants in U.S. custody. Here's VOA's Marcus Harton.
After a tour of a detention center in Clint, Texas last week, U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez criticized the conditions inside.
No woman should ever be locked up in a pen when they have done no harm to another human being. They should be given water. They should be given basic access to human rights.
News reports and an internal Border Patrol report focused attention on overcrowding and prolonged detention of migrants. The acting head of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan, said on ABC's This Week his agency is doing what it can to cope with the migrants who have entered the U.S. just this year.
We've had over 500,000 people cross our southern border. The predominant crossings are made by family units, unaccompanied children, and then single adults.
McAleenan said reports of unsanitary conditions and inadequate food and water were unsubstantiated. He listed steps taken to improve the detention centers.
So we've done a tremendous amount. Since December 30th, when we last talked about this, we had 20 medical providers in our facilities, border-wide. Now we have over 200. We've built soft-sided temporary facilities. These are spaces that are much more appropriate, high ceilings, more room for children and families.
I mean, what I saw was a number of people at 14, up to 14 in one area, sleeping on the floors. A number of them saying they don't bathe within 15 days.
Representative Rashida Tlaib was part of a congressional delegation that toured the Clint, Texas border station last week.
I mean, I don't know how to explain to people what we saw when we're explaining to people, and they're kind of looking back and saying, well, that can't be true. I said, but we were all there.
Congress recently approved the release of $4.6 billion in emergency funds. Much of it meant to improve conditions for migrant children and families in border detention facilities. Marcus Harton, VOA News, Washington.
The heavily favored United States team defeated Netherlands 2-0 Sunday in the Women's World Cup soccer final in Lyon, France, securing its fourth title and winning back-to-back tournaments for the first time. The Americans defeated 4 other European teams, Sweden, Spain, France and England, on their way to the final and dominated the reigning European champion Dutch team. American star Megan Rapinoe, who received the Golden Boot at the tournament's top scorer, scored the opening goal for the U.S. on a penalty kick in the 61st minute. Teammate Rose Lavelle added a goal in the 69th minute to seal the victory. U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated the team on Twitter. Meanwhile, the U.S. women's team is suing America's Soccer Federation for equal pay with members of country's much less successful men's national team. And now let's head to Egypt for the Africa Cup of Nations, where Africa 54 sports guru Sande Shomari is standing by in Cairo. Good evening, Sande. Walk us through the tournament's Cinderella story. Madagascar's national team is now in the quarterfinals. What's the reaction?
Esther, I say salam alaikum from Egypt. And tonight, surprises do happen, Esther, as you say. The dark horse, Madagascar, is now heading to the quarterfinals for the very first time in their history and history of AFCON. They qualified for the very first time, and now it's a Cinderella story, Esther. This team is heading to the quarterfinals. What a surprise, Esther.
I know, but now the sad part of this is that the host Egypt is out. South Africans kicked them out. What's the reaction?
Esther, Esther, the fallout is great. Right now, as we speak, already the coach, Javier Aguirre, has been sacked, and also the whole technical bench is gone, has resigned, including the president of Egyptian Football Federation has resigned as well. The whole fallout is great. Right now, Esther, nobody is interested now to watch more of the soccer, which is like a dent to us here trying to see how Egyptians were vibrant during this competition in the beginning. So right now, things are a little bit different, Esther. But however, I spoke to the coach of South Africa, and I wanted to know, how did they pull this surprise? Let's listen.
Well, the only thing that surprises me is people get surprised. That surprises me.
It's because of the team composition. He lost to Ivory Coast, he lost to Morocco. That's why they're surprised. They didn't expect you to do against Egypt.
No, well, I mean, I've said, you know, our preparations were not good. We came in on, we had 45 minutes for the whole squad each against Ghana, and that was our preparation. So we have been, let's say, warming up with games in the AFCON, which is ridiculous. But we've got gradually better. The players now, I think, they're firing on all cylinders, and now the tournament becomes interesting.
What did you do different from other games to do it tonight?
We pressed high, but we pressed higher because that was the opponent, Egypt. We had to stop the supply into Mo Salah. We had to stop the supply to Trezeguet, and I think we did that very well.
Your next opponent is Nigeria. What do you say about that?
Yeah, top class. They're top class. It's going to be a great challenge and a great inspiration. We'll do our best. Thank you.
Sunday, one man's pain is the other one's gain now, South Africa. What a loss for Egypt. Anyway, Mali is facing Ivory Coast. What are these brothers from West Africa up to? Who is likely to win this one today?
So if you tell the history says Mali and Ivory Coast has the better game because they have won like 4 times in the previous encounters. But you never know, Esther. History do change, and things can change tonight. As you see right now, it's halftime. These teams are goalless, draw. They're sweating it out. As you say, they are brothers from another mother. They know each other very well, Esther. So you never know what's going to happen in the next 45 minutes. Let's wait and see. It's going to be a good football to watch, Esther, and let's see what's going to happen. But another game will be Ghana and Tunisia later this evening at 9 Egyptian time. That will be another great football to watch, since Ghana is very well prepared and Tunisia has been so interesting, but they are ready for Ghana, Sunday, as they saw.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll see what's going to happen, Esther.
Oh, sure. We'll chat tomorrow. Sunday, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Africa 54 sports guru Sunday Shomari reporting live from Cairo. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.